Theodor.
Thank you everybody. Glad to see you all here. Yeah, my name is Theo Beutel. I've been working in the DAO space for a while as a governance lead for Safe and MetaDAO, and I guess I've become quite disillusioned over the years. I mean, who would have not thought that blockchain solves all of humanity's coordination problems instantly, right? So that's an issue. But I'm here today in my capacity as a researcher with University of Zurich. I'm also part of Uwe's project and working together with Pam on this project he mentioned, exploring digital democracy and DAOs. And we're writing this paper, which I'm going to introduce today to you. We have some preliminary findings, so they're not really final yet. But yeah, maybe just to dive into, I guess we can all agree that democracy is getting rug pulled lately when Trump coin launches and people like, Vitalik or Puja sort of make it quite clear that this is a pretty convenient vehicle for bribery and corruption. And yeah, so also Amin Soleimani, co-founder of Moloch DAO, just last week as well tweeted questioning whether everyone should have a right to vote, saying, I don't believe everyone should have a vote. And he is an influential, reputable person in the DAO space, also working on Spank Chain. To go into the paper, just for context, I'm not sure how much you all are aware of DAOs, but I think it makes sense to see them sort of as this wide, vast solution space of plurality where you have lots of mechanisms being explored. They're also very modular. The infrastructure has lots of bits and pieces. Often there can be combined in various ways. And of course, it's also permissionless innovation where you don't have to ask for approval. It's quite a flat hierarchy. Everyone can just build, like user innovation is really strong here. So in some sense, we have 10 years of rapid prototyping of democracy. I would like to see it like that. And so the question emerges, what's new here? Or maybe do DAOs and does democracy and DAOs just repeat the same mistakes democracy and humanity has done over centuries and longer? So let's dive in, and the definition we are adopting is by Samar Hassan and Primavera de Filippi, that a DAO is a blockchain-based system that enables people to coordinate, govern themselves, mediated by a set of self-executing rules deployed on a public blockchain, and whose governance is decentralized, i.e. independent from central control. So quite a classic definition, focusing on the on-chain aspects. Of course, you might think, but I think we all have we may have some sense of what is a DAO really. The term has been used quite extensively recently for a couple of reasons, and I'll come back to that later. But interestingly, also at DEF CON, we had a few reports being presented by Medagov introducing DAOs in Asia, in Singapore, Korea, and Taiwan especially, which I can recommend reading. And they're really framed as a cultural movement, an enabling philosophy, sort of as a placeholder for hope for change. And they are quite explicit that many of them are not at all on-chain, they are off-chain. So that aside, we just acknowledge that this is a very recent trend. But we are conducting a literature review, so we are focused on the theory being available in the academic body of literature. And looking at these research questions, how digital democracy is defined in DAOs, focusing on mechanisms and challenges. And the methodology, really briefly, is following the Prisma approach, sort of a process to make systematic literature reviews more transparent and repeatable. And we, after removing after applying inclusion and exclusion criteria to 599 individual papers, we came up with 51 papers that qualify. And so I'll just give you an overview on the mechanisms first, and then we can continue to the challenges and maybe go a bit broader. I also want to leave time for questions at the end, so please, I'd encourage you to think of some if you may. So first, quite obviously, maybe on-chain governance would probably qualify as a mechanism. And of course, this is interesting in a couple of ways. We have accountability. We can expect that. We have transparency. We have a tamper-proof record of votes that are cast on the chain. If you look at the second column, we can probably say that that applies to all DAOs. Of course, depends on the definition. Going back to the earlier slide, but this is a widely used mechanism, of course. And in terms of novelty to democracy beyond the crypto space, we can probably say this is quite high, just due to the novelty of blockchain technology and its decentralized nature. But that the novelty aspect may not be that high for other aspects. For example, subsidiarity. For example, sub-DAOs. We've seen lots of DAOs having pods, they are called sometimes, sub-DAOs. Some other terms apply as well, where within the DAO you see smaller groups who organize independently. And I think subsidiarity is a really interesting principle where which we also see applied, I think in Switzerland a lot, in Germany, in the European Union to some extent, where decisions that can competently be made on a smaller scale are made on that smaller scale. So sort of a opposing idea to the top-down rule, but focusing on taking decisions at the smallest level possible. And DAOs are not a perfect example of that, but some go into that direction, and we have a few occurrences. Also, voting, of course, we have democratic voting mechanisms specifically. Civil resistance is the term that is mostly used in the literature and in practice to discuss whether they are actually democratic, because of course we have this problem on the blockchain. We have wallets, but we don't know about people. We have a single person can easily, of course, hold lots of wallets. We have sophisticated privacy tech, which I believe is a very good thing, but that also makes it really hard to have certainty on how many wallets are individual people or belong to the same person. So that's a really hard problem, and we see many approaches, most notably maybe a WorldCoin, who are also present here, with their quite controversial biometric iris scan. Also seen lots of other examples like Proof of Humanity, a Bright ID, also social mechanisms connected to universal basic income, trying that. But I think it's fair to say that we have only few occurrences of that, because of course, as you know, we have lots of non-democratic voting mechanisms. And just going back to the democratic voting mechanism, the novelty may actually be quite low, just because nation states have a pretty sophisticated way of ensuring that through KYC. Blockchain just makes that a lot harder, of course also due to its values. Non-democratic voting mechanisms, which are not the focus of this paper, but I guess should be mentioned because we have many of them, include token-weighted voting, they include meritocracy, they include something like conviction voting, quadratic voting. They are all not necessarily one person, one vote, but of course also worth exploring, because people like Glenn Vale argue that something like quadratic voting is in fact maybe a superior mechanism for democracies, but this is beyond the scope really of this paper. So these are highly relevant, of course, but moving on, we also have delegation, which is not a novel mechanism at all. Maybe liquid democracy has not been experimented much in democracies beyond the crypto space. I think we have the Pirate Party in Germany trying that out, but in the crypto space that is quite a popular approach, used occasionally, whereas delegation is used frequently. However, introduces many problems, which we come to later. Adaptive or dynamic quorums are also an interesting vehicle. I guess the digitalization of blockchain just makes it much easier to automate the quorum compared to quite manual voting processes beyond crypto. And interestingly, Rage Quit, coined by Moloch DAO, where you sort of opt into a DAO, but you can also opt out at any time, and you take your money with you that you spend to buy in, is an interesting example of exiting the system, which as part of these early results are still to be discussed how they relate to democracy, and also to mention forking, sort of a way to exit the system. And yeah, just to mention constitutions as well, we have seen a movement of constitutions in Web3 used by some, but again, low novelty and sort of learning from democracy beyond DAOs, not vice versa. In terms of challenges, of course, concentration of voting power. We've seen that a lot. An interesting study says along the lines of most DAOs start off unequal. Some DAOs start off with a fair launch, but the study says that even those DAOs launching fairly inevitably lead to a plutocracy again. So these fair launches are not persistent over time. That's just a single study, and surely there's more research to be done on how to solve this, but many studies agree that especially DeFi is highly concentrated regarding voting power, and of course mostly subject to token-weighted voting. Also, voter apathy is a huge problem. We see low voter turnout in many DAOs, which I think led to the introduction of delegation, introducing new problems again. But also non-private voting. I think many blockchains are still public by default. ZK tag is being explored, and some chains have that by default, but I think most DAOs, the most significant DAOs, really have a public track record of votes, and that is maybe quite an obvious issue beyond crypto to have solved, but in blockchain not. So we have lots of problems here, which again, vice versa, maybe DAOs can learn from the real world instead of vice versa. Governance exploits and hacks are a huge topic as well. We have an interesting paper explaining them in detail, and we have quite prominent examples like the DAO hack in 2017, I think, ultimately leading to the fork of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So yeah, DAO exploits have been quite significant, and we have many more over time. Coordination challenges, for example, when you have on-chain governance, this is in the context of pseudonymity. You have on-chain wallets, and then what else do we have? We have discourse forums where you discuss, again, with pseudonyms. We have multiple time zones. We have language barriers. We have mostly asynchronous communication. So all that sort of inhibits coordination amongst human actors, contrary to maybe democratic systems we are used to. And this is just making it especially hard for democracy in the blockchain space. Legal ambiguities, of course, DAOs are still not perfectly clear what kind of entity they are in many jurisdictions. They may default to a general partnership where every voter is liable. It's still unclear. Are you liable if you vote? Are you liable if you just comment? Are you liable if you just hold the token? There was an example or case study that you may be liable if you vote yes, but you're not liable if you vote no. This is just quite a mess, and also inhibiting lots of people from actively participating for a good reason, perhaps. Last but not least, technical barriers and UX challenges. As you all know, crypto is not trivial, and if we want to have democracy, everyone voting, it needs to be very inclusive, and the UX barrier of entry is arguably quite high. Yeah, and just as some bonus challenges, they're not maybe quite related to this, our findings, but I think it's worth mentioning. Decentralization theater, you may have read about that, like obfuscated token allocations, like the founding team coordinating with VCs, and then on paper having lots of wallets holding a distributed amount of tokens, but actually many of them coordinating and building sort of a group that has the ultimate decision-making authority. And other examples of decentralization theater, for example, in MakerDAO, where sometimes Rune is seen as sort of ultimate decision authority. Many other examples apply. A regulatory shield for founders, like our DAO, is just a convenient vehicle for founding teams to push the liability to the legality of a DAO to these token holders out there, just for regulators who are still catching up to think that these founders are not actually liable, or governance tokens or unregistered security. Very recent discussion now with the shift in geopolitics in the US. Some securities have arguably been just labeled as a governance token without really wanting governance using decentralization theater. So all this needs to be taken into account when we want to make sense of what's real and what's just a shell, marketing, or a misuse of the term. Yeah, I'll come to questions in a second, but maybe just to discuss these findings and give some idea of what others are saying. So this is Nathan Schneider on the left-hand side, writing an interesting essay on democracy, worrying a lot. He's a professor for media studies in Boulder, and really knowledgeable very early in the space, and yeah, just arguing, for example, that we had the chance to implement democracy for a long time, and in Web 1 as well, the cypherpunk movement ultimately did not really succeed if we look at the internet today. So blockchain also had this opportunity, but sort of shifted to this more plutocratic, VC-driven movement, which is of concern to lots of sort of more activist researchers in the space. But I guess it can be said that the disillusionment is universal. And Kelsey Nubbin and Darcy Allen arguing that democratic governance is not really able or supposed to transform existing structures, but rather creates this illegal environment, like governance beyond existing institutions, this new space in a legal sense, which is also a controversial point of view in legal literature, but also one way we could see these mechanisms evolving into the future. Yeah, I'll come to questions and skip this. Just the brief history of DAOs, which was recently published by the Kevin Owoki and colleagues. But briefly on that, makes it quite clear and interesting that we have initially like early experiments like the DAO, and then we had these DAO frameworks like Aragon DAO Stack Colony, like DAO operating systems, sort of very comprehensive and very thought through. Actually, I'm really impressed still by them. Unfortunately, DAO Stack is not around anymore, and Colony has not really taken off. But EigenLayer now is reusing Colony's approach with a more reputation-based, non-democratic mechanism, and we see in the second phase a very modular approach with snapshots, of course, with Safe as a multi-sig, with HATS protocols for roles, with Utopia Labs for spending, Zodiac for making snapshot and on-chain executable transaction, Coordinate for reputation. So here you can see the modular infrastructure. But I'll end here and see if you have any thoughts or question.
Yeah, I think we have time for one question. Yep.
You mentioned private voting as a concern, and there's different levels of private voting. For example, encrypting the contents of the votes during the voting period and then revealing them afterwards, or keeping the contents of the votes private permanently. What are the pros and cons of different approaches, and which levels of privacy have already been solved?
Yeah, I guess the best example is shielded voting from Shutter Labs. I think maybe a default now in Snapshot. Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not an expert on that particular question, but I think we have the opportunity to explore that and experiment. And I mean, pseudonymity and privacy is a bigger issue of values and morals, so I think every DAO can choose their own, really, and should have a conscious discussion about that.
I think we're running a bit short of time. Thank you, Theodor. Big applause.